Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorable to my lecturer Mahmud Ma'ina MPD and all my beloved friends. Well, my friends, we are from Group 2. We are going to talk about learner strategies. My name is Fahradila Azahra and my partners are Melda Srijanari Watmia, Miftahul Jannah, Muhammad Rafi Arlintio, Muhammad Fadil and Muhammad Fadli. Okay, in this chapter, we will talk about learner strategies. Well, my friends, the learner has two types of L2 knowledge. The first one is declarative and procedural knowledge. According to Fairch and Casper in 1983, declarative knowledge is knowing that it consists of internalized L2 rules and memorized chunks of language. Meanwhile, procedural knowledge is knowing how. It consists of the strategies and procedures employed by learners to the process of L2 data for acquisition and for use. When we talk about acquiring L2, we normally mean declarative knowledge, as the learner is considered to have access already to set of procedures for the learning L2. Okay, procedural knowledge can be subdivided initially into social and cognitive components. The social components comprises the behavioral strategies used by the learners to manage interactional opportunities. For example, is devices for managing interaction in L2. The cognitive component of procedural knowledge comprises the various mental processes involved in internalizing and automizing new L2 knowledge and in using L2 knowledge in conjunction with other knowledge sources to communicate in the L2. Okay, now strategies. What the meaning of strategies? Strategies are specific methods of approaching a problem or task. They are ways of achieving a particular end or solving a particular problem. Each one of us has a host of possible strategies, which vary from moment to moment, from one situation to another. Well, there are two types of strategy. The first one is learning strategies and communication strategies. What are they? The first one is learning strategies. Learning strategies relate to input, to processing, storage, and retrieval, that is to taking message from others. Brown classified learning strategies into cognitive strategies and socio-affective strategies. Well, the basis of the framework is a distinction between two types of linguistic product: formulaic speech and creative speech. The next is communication strategies. Communication strategies pertain to output, how we productively express meaning, how we deliver message to others. Well, the learning strategies that is relate to input and communication strategies relate to output. According to Brown 2000, communication strategies pertain to the employment of verbal or non-verbal mechanism for the productive communication or information. Basically, the purpose of communication strategies is to solve a communication problem that has emerged by applying some kinds of techniques. Well, my friends, that's all about my explanation. The next explanation will be explained by my friends.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Well, my name is Melda Srijanari Watmia. I would like to continue para explanations. Okay, let's start it. The first materials about hypothesis formations. According French and Casper 1983b, there are three ways of hypothesis about interlanguage role. The first, by using pre-linguistic knowledge, first language knowledge, exciting second language or knowledge of other language. Second, inducting new rule from the input data, and the last by combinations of the first rules and the second rule. Hypothesis formations divided two general strategies. The first is simplifications. Simplification is evident in the use of a number of strategies. For example, transfers include the use of the learner, the first language, as a basis for forming hypotheses about second language, while overgeneralizations include the use of exciting second language knowledge by extending it the new interlanguage form. The second is inferencing. Inferencing is the learner form hypothesis by extending to input. When the second rule not be successfully derived transfer, so the learner will need to conduct the rule from the input. For example, a Spanish learner of English will not succeed in acquiring the rule for negative sentence on a basis of simplifications. A transfer strategy might lead to the no plus verb rule. For example, no like beer. No in the sentence is overgeneralized as a negative of verb as well as noun. So the correct sentence is I don't like beer. There are two types of inferencing. The first is interlingual inferencing. Include a process similar to that of parents analyze of formulaic speech, and the difference being that is the case the learner operates on external second language data rather than internal second language data. For example, star formula. The second is extralingual inferencing, is the one of the most powerful device available to the learner for building hypotheses from external input. It consists of paying attention to the feature of the physical environments and using this to make second language input comprehensible. Next, materials about hypothesis testing. According Franz and Casper 1983b, there are four ways to test the hypothesis. The first is receptively. For example, the learner attends to second language input and compresses his hypothesis with the data provided by means of intake analysis. The second, productively. For example, the learner produces second language utterance containing rule representing the hypothesis he has formed and assess their correctness in the terms of the feedback received. Second, metalingually. For example, the learner consults a native speaker, teacher, grammar, or dictionary to establish the validity of hypothesis. And the last, interactionally. For example, the learner acknowledges a repair for his interlocutor in the manner. Next, about automatization process. Automatization includes both the practicing of second language rule, which enter interlanguage at the formal end of the stylistic continuums, and the practicing of rule, which are already in the use in the vernacular. And this is my summary of my explanations. The process and strategies responsible for creative, there are typically subconscious procedures. For example, they are spontaneously acted by the learner while he is focused on some communicative purpose. There are three hypotheses. There are three process. The first is the hypothesis formations, second hypothesis testing, and the last automatizations. The strategies in hypothesis formations divided two the two types. The first is simplifications and inferencing. Simplifications divided two kinds. They are overgeneralizations and transfer. And in inferencing, divided two kinds. They are intralingual and extralingual. In hypothesis testing, divided four strategies. They are receptions, productive, metalingual, and interactional. And the last, the strategies in automatizations divided two kinds. They are formal practice and functional practice. Okay, I think enough. Sorry for my mistake. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Miptal Jana and I will continue the explanations. Look at the slide. There are production strategies. Utilizing interlanguage rules involves both productions or reception strategies and when initial plans prove problematic, also communication strategies. These sections consider the unproblematic use of L2 language knowledge. It will present a basic model of production receptions is not considered for reasons already stated, and then consider specific strategies associated with the planning and articulation components of the model. Next, a model of L2 productions. It is hypothesis. The L2 productions follows that the same patterns as native speaker productions. The model, which is summarized below, is that described by Clark in 1977. So the starting point is the speaker's communicative goal. The communicative goal will determine the type of discourse plan the speaker needs to form. These plans will reflect whether the communicative goal needs to be realized through the dialogue or through monologue. It will also reflect to what extent the discourse is conventional and therefore scriptal, or requires unique planning once the speaker has formed an appropriate discourse plan. He begins to construct sentence plan. After determining the general propositional content and illusionary meaning, the discourse and sentence plans together constitute a skeleton. The next stage leads into the execution component of the model. It consists of building plans for the structure of each constituent. However, the language user does not necessarily build plans for the constituents of the proposed utterance. He is likely to alternate between the planning of individual constituents and their executions. Thus, the constituents planning stage and the articulatory program stages do not follow in linear fashion. Evidence that the user moves backward and forward from planning to executions can be found in the pause which occur in speech. These are typically found at constituents boundaries and seems to be motivated by the learner's need for time to plan the next constituents. And then next, Clark suggests that the articulatory program itself has 5 stages. The first one is the selections of the meaning that each constituent is to have. And the second, the selections of a syntactic outline for the constituents, for example, specifying the actual word slots. The third, content word selections, for example, choosing nouns. verbs, adjectives, and adverbs to fit into the appropriate slots. The fourth, affix and functions word formations. For example, slotting in the form, words, and grammatical inflections. And the last, specifications of the phonetic segments. The final component of the model is the motor program, for example, the actual productions of the utterance. And this picture is provides the diagrammatical representations of Clark and Clark's skeleton and constituents model. So move to the next slide. Littlewood in 1979 proposed a predictions model specifically to account for L2 use. His model closely follows that of Clark and Clark. Littlewood distinguishes two sets of strategies based on the model: minimal strategies and maximal strategies. The former characterized productions in the early stages of SLA. They involve the learner simplifying both of constituent planning and articulatory stages in the number of ways. The learner may not develop constituent plans for all the major constituents of the sentence. Instead, he may plan for only the minimal number of unsharp meaning elements, allowing the situational context to stand in for this missing. And then Ellis in 1982 describes this as a strategy of semantic simplifications. Another type of simplifications can occur in the articulatory program when the learner chooses to encode only content words and to omit affix and functions word formations. This may occur either because the learner has not yet constructed hypotheses for those aspects of the L2, or because of processing pressures which do not permit him time to make a true search of his linguistic researches. Thirdly, simplifications may take place in the motor program. For example, sounds may be elite. Maximal strategies occur when the learner has developed both sufficient L2 knowledge and adequate control over this knowledge to realize all constituents linguistically, thus removing. And then the need to rely on shared knowledge. They also involve the ability to make linguistic selections of sufficient delicacy to encode stylistic markers such as those relating to politeness. Thus, whereas early production is likely to be marked by modality reductions, later productions will feature the use of those grammatical systems, for example, modal verbs and adverbial expressions associated with modality maximal strategies are reflected in the complexifications of the interlanguage system. And next, the skeleton and constituents model also provide a framework for interpreting Seligers in 1980 interesting distinctions between planners and correctors. The planners are those who plan each constituent carefully before starting the articulatory program. Okay, that's all for my explanations. Move to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Fadil and I will explain the material about strategies of communication. The term communication strategy was coined by Selinker in 1972 in his account of the process responsible for interlanguage. There has been a steady increase of interest in the learner's communication strategy since then. Much of this interest, however, has been taken up with the problems of definition. It's to this that I first turn. Following this, a typology of communication strategy will be provided and a survey of empirical studies of their use by L2 learners undertaken. This section will conclude with some comments about the role of communication strategies in SLA. Okay, next. Defining communication strategies. Two key concepts feature in most discussion of communication strategies. These are that they are conscious and they and that they are problems oriented, and according to Faraday in 1973 points out that although errors may arise either inadvertently or deliberately. In the case of the former, they are the result of production strategy and reflect the transitional state of the learner's L2 knowledge. In the case of the latter, they are the result of communication strategies that are consciously employed by the learner in order to reduce or replace some elements of meaning or form in the initial plan. Okay, next. Conscious concept figure. According Firth and Casper in 1980, also consider consciousness to be defining characteristic of communication strategies, but they recognize the difficulty of deciding empirically whether a strategy is conscious or otherwise, as learners may not always be aware of their use of communicative strategies. They suggest that a better definition is to refer to them as a potentially conscious. Okay, next. Problem-oriented concept figure. Communication strategies are problem-oriented, that is, they are employed by the learner because he lacks or cannot gain access to the linguistic resource required to express an intended meaning. Firth and Casper in 1988 classify communication strategies as a part of a particular kind of plan which is activated when the initial plan cannot be carried out. The learner is forced into substituting as a strategic plan for his original production plan because he discovered he has insufficient means to implement the production plan. However, communicative strategies are not alone in being problem-oriented. Learner strategies can also be motivated by the learner's recognition that existing means are insufficient. But communication strategies differ from learning strategies in that the problem arises as a result of attempts to perform in the L2, and the strategies are needed to meet a pressing communicative need. If learning strategies are the long-term solution to a problem, communication strategies provide the short-term answer. Okay, next. Communication strategies are employed by native speakers as well as by L2 learners. Most of the communication strategies listed in the typology in the following section are common to both. They are to be seen as a part of communication competence. According to Cannell and Swine in 1980, identify strategic competence, defined as how to cope in an authentic communicative situation and how to keep the communicative channel open as an integral part of the language user. Overall communicative competence. In the light of the foregoing discussion, communication strategies can be defined as follows. Communication strategies are psycholinguist plans which exist as part of the language user communicative competence. They are potentially conscious and serve substitutes for production plans which the learner is unable to implement. Okay, I think that's all for me. The next material will be explained by Much Fadli. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Fadli and I am from Group 2. Well, in this video, I would like to explain about the material of a typology of communication strategies. Perhaps because of the problem of definition, there is no generally agreed typology of communication strategies. In addition, typologies relating specifically to lexical problems are provided by Bloom, Kulka, and Levenstone, 1978, and Paribak, 1982. Many of these strategies will be difficult to identify in actual data. Some example, the retrieval strategies will not be manifest in actual performance at all. Ideally, therefore, the identification of the use of communication strategies need to make use of introspective research technique, as well as the analysis of speech data. Empirical research. Theoretical discussion of communication strategies has predominated over empirical research into their use. This reflection of the uncertainty of their definition and the consequent problems of identification, the result of the available research are suggestive rather than definitive. They can be summarized in terms of the effect of different variables on the use of communication strategies. Well, the first is effect of proficiency level. The proficiency level of the learner influences his choice of strategies. Ellis 1982 also found that one of the learner in his longitudinal study opted for reduction type behavior in the earlier stage, but increasingly turned to achievement type behavior as he progressed. Number two is effect of the problem source. There is less evidence to demonstrate the strategy's choice is influenced by the specific nature of the problem, but this would seem likely. The third is effect of personality. Taron 1977 observed definite differences in her learner overall approach to storytelling. One learner spoke quickly and provide little detail in either language 1 or language 2 performance, whereas another elaborate and frequently appealed for assistance. And the last is effect of learning situation. It will seem probable that learner use of communication strategies is affected by the situation of use. For instance, learner may use fewer strategies in a classroom environment than in a natural environment, particularly if the pedagogic focus is one correct language to use rather than on a fluent communication. The role of communication strategies. Communication strategies, by definition, are concerned with language to production. An important use, however, is to what extent and in what ways they contribute to language to learning. Communication strategies have, in fact, been allocated a constructive role in SLA. Another issue to do with the role of communication strategies in SLA is what aspect of interlanguage development is affected. In particular, it is important to know whether the use of communication strategies facilitate the acquisition of lexis and or grammatical rules. In summary, communication strategies are used by language to learner and native speaker. When they are faced by a production problem, they consist of substitute plans and are potentially confused. A typology of communication strategies distinguish reduction strategies, which are used to avoid the problem altogether, and achievement strategies, which are used to overcome the problem. The latter can be further divided into compensatory strategies, including both language 1 and language 2 based strategies, and retrieval strategies. There has been only limited empirical study of communication strategies, but there is evidence to suggest that their use is influenced by the learner proficiency level, the nature of the problem source, the learner personality, and the learning situation. Well, I think that's from me. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.